Well, welcome to another program. We're here with Eileen Day McKusick, who is the founder of Biofield Tuning and the author of Tuning the Human Biofield. It's a privilege to have you on, Eileen. Thank you for taking your time.
Great. Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Well, let's have everyone get introduced to you. If you can give us a short bio, and maybe even if you would like to tell a little bit of your personal story, which is a great way that you kick your book off.
Sure. Well, in 1996, I introduced a set of tuning forks into my part-time massage therapy practice. And really right off the bat, started noticing really intriguing phenomenon with that. You know, I thought that if you activate a tuning fork and you hold it next to someone, that it's just going to produce an objective tone, right? It's just going to sound like a tuning fork. And what I discovered was that the tone that the fork produced would change depending on where I held it over a person's body. And it would change dramatically. Like in some cases, it would go really sharp. It could go flat. The sound could disappear altogether. Sometimes it would go really loud. And I started to notice a correlation between, like, if it sounded sharp over an area where someone said that they were experiencing pain, for example. So if someone had a sore shoulder and I held the fork kind of right over it, it would take on this sharp quality. But I also noticed that if I kept on introducing the fork into that area, that after a little while, that sharpness would go away and then the tone would sound more harmonic or pleasing. And then the person would come back the next week and they'd say, all that pain in my shoulder went away after you did that. And that sound thing was really cool. And can you do that again? And so in very short order, my massage practice just kind of morphed into a sound therapy practice. And I did this part-time for about 10 years. You know, I started in Connecticut in the 90s, and you can imagine how people responded when I said that I was using tuning forks for healing. And they were actually, they were a set to be used in people's chakras. I was like, I'm using tuning forks to balance people's chakras. And, you know, people were really skeptical and even mean about it. And I'm actually I'm very logical and very practical. So it was kind of offensive to me to be perceived as like some kind of new age woo-woo healer. You know, I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be seen as that. But it remained intriguing to me. So I continued to do it just sort of as a hobby. I ended up moving to Vermont and continuing it as a hobby. But at that time in Vermont, I had started a specialty food business making organic kettle corn. I was the first person to bring kettle corn into stores back in 2004. And that business was going really great. It was, you know, I was going to blow it up. I was going to sell it to Frito-Lay. that was my life plan, to be a queen of popcorn. And then something really interesting happened that changed my trajectory completely. And that was that I was working one day with a woman who was complaining that she had pain and a sense of pulling in her neck and her jaw and down into her shoulder. And she'd seen all kinds of other practitioners, but nobody had been able to help her. And just sort of by accident, I discovered, well, I have to back up a little bit, because one of the things that I did from the beginning was I discovered that there could be loud spots, you know, when I was working on people. I'd kind of pass the fork over their hips and the fork would go loud. And I remember thinking, okay, well, these are working with chakras. Chakras are energy centers. So if it's going to be loud anywhere, it should probably be loud over the quote chakra or the energy center, what I've come to see as a nerve plexus in the body. And so I discovered that I could use the tuning fork to kind of hook into the loud spots and actually drag them like you might use a magnet to drag iron filings. And I could move these loud spots into the center. I called it click, drag, and drop, because it really was like a click into what I perceived as energy, because I didn't know what else to call it, and move it into the center. And that's the practice that I developed. I just find loud spots along people's bodies, move them into the center. So on this particular day, I sort of by accident found a loud spot about 2.5 feet off of this woman's neck. And so I I did the little click, drag and drop thing, and I used the tuning fork to kind of hook into it, and I dragged it and then dropped it into her throat. And it kind of had this feeling like it was sucked in. And then, that was loud over her throat. But she called me the next day and she said, Eileen, all of that pain and pulling and discomfort is gone. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So the next people who came in, I started exploring as far away as I could, about 6 feet off their bodies, in that particular treatment room, and moving in slowly towards the body. And I discovered that there was like this whole field of information and energy that was surrounding the body, that there were all kinds of not just loud spots, but things that felt like walls or channels or areas of turbulence. It was very, very intriguing. And so I would just, if I got into a spot that was kind of turbulent, I'd hang out there for a little while and then it would settle down. But the other part of what I noticed was when the fork changed tone, that, just like in music, like a minor third, when we hear that, it evokes a sense of sadness, right? So what I was finding was that when the tones were changing, that they were evoking a particular like emotional feeling in me. And I started to observe that every time I was observing this tonal change that would sound like sadness, for example, that I was always finding it in the same area, like off the left side of the heart center. Or every time the tone would change and it would sound like angry, I was finding it off where the liver is on the right side of the body. And I started to observe this pattern of information storage in this sort of cloud around the human body. And that, over the course of a number of years, maybe 3 or 4 years of just exploring this terrain, I discovered, I basically created this hypothesis that I call the Biofield anatomy hypothesis, which says that memories, maybe in addition to or instead of being stored in our brain, are actually stored in the magnetic field that surrounds our human body. And that there's, just like researchers have mapped the brain, or like this part of the brain does this and that, I've actually mapped the field and discovered that specific memories are specific waveform patterns, and that they're stored in like these file drawers around our body. So not only do we have this sort of stratified or compartmentalized storage system, but that there was also a timeline aspect to it. So that information that I was finding close to the body was recent or current, and information that I found out at the edge of the field. And the field appeared to be bounded by what I now call a double layer plasma membrane, which is fractally pretty much the same thing as our magnetosphere or the sun's heliosphere. The idea that anywhere you have an electrically charged body, you have this sort of magnetic bubble around it, and that bubble has a boundary of container. And so just like, for example, the ionosphere traps the Schumann resonance or radio waves, right, in standing waves, our own outer boundary traps these emanations from our body in standing waves, and that the memories are like magnetically and even like binarily encoded in these standing waves. And so the information that I was finding at the very outer edge of the field seemed to relate to gestation, to birth, and then everything else fell in between like rings in a tree. So I'm using, and I've taught hundreds of students now to do this, the tuning fork, kind of like a needle on an album, where we start at the outer edge and we move the tuning fork in slowly towards the body. And what happens is that the overtones and undertones that are produced by the tuning fork interact with the information in these standing waves and basically broadcasts it so that you can hear, and it's very, very obvious. Like when somebody's going through, you're reading an area in someone's history when they went through stress or they were in a car accident, there's these very distinct tones that are made that, that we teach. And there's some that are really easy to recognize are alarm, which has this very kind of high-pitched edge to it. Like if someone's in a car accident, suddenly that tone will be in their field. Depression, which has kind of a undertone, kind of like a wong to it. fear, which actually has a pulsing quality. So, when you get really scared, you start to shake. And that's because the waveform of fear has this kind of quality to it. So when we're experiencing it, that's what it does. And then the record of that is we can find that in the field. And then sadness, which is a really distinct one. I mean, it just sounds sad. So it's like this very pure tonal language that we're able to kind of read and decipher. And what's so cool is that I figured out that both animals and plants have express the same vibrational language, so that if a plant is afraid or an animal is afraid, they're going to give off the same frequency pattern as humans. So we all have this kind of fundamental vibrational common language that's just so fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. Got a million questions just from that few minutes of introduction. And the first one is, you mentioned starting with forks, and I'm curious why fork and not something like a crystal bowl or a medicine bowl or one of these other kind of these tools that are used a lot in sound healing.
I think back in 96, bowls weren't quite as available as they are now. And that was 21 years ago. I think the way that it came to me was that I had read a book, and I think it was Quantum Healing by Deepak Chopra, that introduced me to the idea like everything is vibration. And things appear solid, but they're really not. And they're really just packets of, vibration and information. And then somehow or other, I got my hands on a book called The Use of Sound, Music, and Color in Healing. And I remember reading it and thinking, well, if everything is vibration, I'm vibration, then treating vibration with vibration is just very logical. It's very elegant. It's very direct, right? So because I'm a researcher by nature, when I get interested in a particular topic, I go as far down the rabbit hole as I possibly can. And I went out and I got every single book I could possibly find. And there weren't a lot at that time. And it just, I don't know, it resonated with me. And shortly after I finished, going through the stack of books on my bedside table, I got a catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing in it, and just ordered them impulsively. So it was, it showed up on my radar, and I just kind of jumped on it and started using it.
There is, to understand really what you're doing requires a lesson in physics to a certain degree, right? And so I wonder if you can give us a 101 overview of the physics that are applicable to biofield tuning and to understanding this process and what's going on with the body.
Yeah, that's great. So, what happened to me when I started discovering the phenomena out in the field, and I started working there, my therapeutic outcomes became dramatic. They'd already been pretty cool, but they became like super dramatic. Like people who'd had anxiety for 30 years, it was gone in 1 or 2 sessions, or people that had pain for a long time. What was being reported was just sort of jaw-dropping to me. And I realized I was onto something, and that I kind of needed to get it out in the world. But then there was this image problem of, how it appeared at first take to most people. And so one day it just came to me very clearly, and like the universe spoke to me, and it said, you need to go to school and get degrees and learn and teach about sound. And so I sold my popcorn business and I enrolled in college as an adult. I never went out of high school. And I proceeded to get my undergraduate degree and my master's degree in 5 years. And I wrote a master's thesis called Exploring Effects of Audible Sound on the Human Body and its Biofield, because I wanted to, understand the phenomena that I was encountering. It was very strange to me. I'm like, what is this? Because as I was moving through the field and I was finding these loud spots, there also appeared to be like a substance to them. Like there was this actual tangible sense of resistance, and almost like there was stuff there. And so I was asking, okay, what is this stuff that I'm encountering? Because it really feels like it has mass. And what law of physics is dictating the fact that the tuning fork can move it? Like, is sound magnetic? Like, is this magnet? Like, I didn't understand. And it was really hard to find physicists or scientists to talk to about it. Like, hey, I'm from Vermont. I wave tuning forks around people. And, and people would be like, I don't even want to talk to you, So that was really frustrating. And I was really kind of like on my own trying to figure this out. But I learned a bunch of things and that started to give me insight into it. So one of them was that in music therapy, what they find works for people. Like if you have someone in an agitated state and you try to play them calming music, they're going to reject it because they don't resonate with it. So a technique that they've developed in music therapy is they will initially play music that matches like someone's agitation, for example, that resonates with their state. And then they will slowly change the music to move towards a calmer or more relaxed state. So they will entrain people into, a more calm experience. And that I said, oh, that's really interesting because that's what the tuning forks do. Like when I get into an area of information in the field, and let's say there's a lot of turbulence there because it was a really chaotic period in someone's life, the tuning fork will initially resonate with that distortion. But then because it's producing a stronger signal of coherence, it will entrain the body into a more coherent expression. So that's just the very basic physics principles of resonance and entrainment. The other thing that has since been established by science, I spent years going on Google and searching the phrase sound is magnetic because it really seemed like the tuning fork was acting like a magnet in the magnetic field of the body. And I never found anything. I found stuff related to people describing music as magnetic, like the music was playing down in that alley and we were drawn to it, that sort of thing, but nothing about sound. And then last year, I finally found an article that scientists had found that sound in a particular frequency range actually exhibited magnetic properties. I was like, okay, amen and hallelujah. Okay, there's some science behind, what is going on here. And a tuning fork technically produces an infinite number of overtones. So, you're looking at just this huge range of both audible and inaudible sound. So obviously there's some aspect of that exhibits that magnetic tendency. So, that's my understanding. I also, in the process of trying to understand the nature of the energy in the field around the body, came across plasma, bioplasma, and electric universe theory. And as I came to kind of get insight into that opened up this whole new world and this whole new cosmology that I didn't expect. So that's part of the hypothesis as well.
Let's get into that. I really like your explanation in the book. Elegant, simple, and easy to wrap your head around if you're not a scientist.
Yeah. So around electric universe theory?
Yeah, all of that, everything you just said.
Well, it's interesting because the whole reason why I kind of even went into healing or massage at the first place, and I started reading self-help books when I was around 18. I was just a typical American teenager. I was depressed. I was sick in the head. I was just, not well. And so I just started reading self-help books and really became, if I have any addiction, it's to information and I'm, just constantly reading, constantly absorbing information. And I probably read hundreds and hundreds of self-help books, but nothing ever cracked the nut. Nothing ever took away that sort of background angst that was always there. And what happened was, as I was working on my master's degree and seeking to understand what I was encountering in this process, my son came to dinner one night. I'd given him some books on science for his 12th birthday. And he said, did you know that there's a fourth state of matter called plasma? And I was like, solid, liquid, gas. No, I never learned about plasma. I don't know about how can there be a whole other state of matter that I've never heard of. And so then somehow we ended up talking about space and space being a vacuum. And my husband was like, well, of course, space is a vacuum. And I said, no, I read somewhere once that space isn't really a vacuum. There's actually something there. So I went and I Googled. I just love Google. I love being a researcher in this day and age when there's just so much, anything you could ask, you can find the answer to. It's so exciting to me. I'm so glad I waited till I was an adult to go to college because in 1985, there was no internet. So I Googled space is not a vacuum and came up with plasma of all things. And that sent me down the plasma rabbit hole. And I spent the next 4 or 5 months reading everything I could about plasma. And that led to the discovery of electric universe theory. And electric universe theory it's basically a new cosmological story that says that electricity, not gravity, is the dominant force in space. And that everything that we've been told about space and like Big Bang and black holes and dark energy and dark matter, that's all nonsense. Like it's illogical. It's it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't hang together. But when you learn about electric universe theory, that says that, the sun is not a thermonuclear furnace burning itself out. It's actually electric. It's an electric entity. And the solar wind isn't this, hot gas being blown at us. It's electrically charged particles, which is why when we have like a coronal mass ejection and it gets, additional plasma or electricity in our upper atmosphere lights up like neon lights. Is because the plasma in our upper atmosphere has gone from dark current mode to glow mode. And it goes to glow mode with the increase in voltage into the system, right? It's all electrical phenomena. and then I learned about, the nature of plasma and how it forms these sheaths and bubbles, just like the magnetosphere of the earth or the heliosphere of the sun. And I was like, wow, well, fractally, that really makes sense in the context of what I'm discovering with the human, what I was calling it an aura or an energy field at first, because I didn't know what to call it. And then I came across, trying to write a thesis and looking up human energy field in PubMed, Medline. Of course, there's nothing there. But then I came across the term biofield, which is actually National Institute of Health phrase or term for the field of energy and information that surrounds and penetrates the human body. So there is a scientific term. When I started searching that, I found a whole bunch more information. And then I came across the term bioplasma, which is the idea that, as a human, we do have a magnetic field, but it's related to our biology. So it's called a bioplasma, and that behaves in the same way that plasmas do. So when I learned about electric universe theory, I realized that this is a cosmology of connectivity and light. And what I mean by that is that like the whole universe is electrically connected. And there's actually, it's observed that there's this whole sort of filamentary quality to the universe where electricity is running along what are called Birkeland currents. And so that all the stars and galaxies are actually connected by these wires of electrical current. And so I realized, oh my God, the same electricity that is powering the stars and powering our sun is powering my human body. And it's all one electricity and it's all connected. And suddenly it dawned on me that the cosmology of Big Bang it's all about entropy and dissolution and separation and darkness and mystery and pointlessness. And, it's a miserable cosmology. It makes you feel, and like the sound doesn't travel through space. We're we're in this rock in the middle of nowhere and it's insignificant and random and pointless, right? It's like, oh God, that just sucks. And then you hear that everything's actually electrical and connected and light. And there's this whole other force called syntropy that counters entropy, then you're like, oh my God, like that was what I'd been looking for in all of those self-help books that I never found because it was all still under this overarching cosmological misery. and so I was like, we can say all is one from a quote spiritual perspective, but that doesn't hang together with Big Bang and the empty, you know what I mean? It doesn't match up. But when you look at the logic and the sensibility and the evidence for electric universe, and you see that it's all light and that it's all connected, then suddenly all is one makes a lot more sense. And then that was the end of the self-help books. Like this book that I read called The Electric Sky was like, it's not even a self-help book. It's just a really great scientific treatise on how and why electric universe theory makes sense. And I never needed another book after that. I felt connected to the universe in a way that both my logical mind and then my more spatial mind could both agree on.
Let's define this biofield. You mentioned it earlier. It is an important component to understanding overall health, wellness, and these other layers. They're sort of subtler in energy, if you will, than the physical body. And all of its component energies, what we can measure and what we have yet to measure.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that's tricky and kind of slippery is because we, there tends to be a cultural belief that is supported by propaganda, in my opinion, that there's no such thing as a human energy field. So most people right away don't get or don't buy the concept of an aura or a biofield. And there's also belief that it's never been measured, but that's simply not true. There's been a device around since I think the 60s called a squid magnetometer that has been able to measure the magnetic field of the heart from up to 12 feet away. So, it's a very, very low current, very, it's not a strong field. I can't measure it with my trimeter, that's not picking it up because it's much more subtle than that. And you need much more subtle instrumentation. We do know, through instrumentation, that the heart does produce a very large magnetic field. And my hypothesis is that we create this field, this bubble, this sort of bioplasmic bubble that extends about 6 feet off to the sides and 2 to 3 feet to the top and bottom, and that it has a kind of toroidal quality. And that it stores our memory. It's kind of like our own personal cloud storage. And every experience that we have, every single, thought, encounter, breath, it's all recorded within this. And I see it as recorded actually in the ether. That's a whole other state of matter that fits into the cosmology of the biofield or biofield tuning. The ether is the medium that light travels through. And it was seen and understood as, part of the cosmology up until about the 1930s. And, it's so interesting. They took Tesla out of the history books. At the same time, they took out ether because Tesla had figured out how to tap into the ether and to concentrate that energy and to broadcast it for free. Right. So when, and the reason being of that, like conspiracy theory, whatever, that it's just economics, that the ether is an incredible well of energy that exists all around us. To me, it's holographic. It is like the universal hard drive that records every single keystroke of information. So it is, it holds memory much in the same way water does, or, sand, silica. So within the bioplasmic bubble, we also have our own etheric template, which could also be called the Akasha, the Akashic record. And people talk about accessing the Akashic record. They're simply accessing the ether, which contains all of this information. So so we've added 2 states of matter, right? Solid, liquid, and gas is the world most people are living in. But we've added plasma and ether to the equation. And this helps to kind of explain how this model works. So, people who have had a lot of trauma have a lot of what we call noise in their signal and resistance in their field. That I come across people and they've got all these areas where, this is vibrating in this way with this trauma and this is this trauma. And what the tuning fork does is it settles these things down and it actually discharges them. Because there's a charge associated with it. And it's funny because when I first started working out in the field, it had dawned on me that what I was working with were like soul fragments. Mm. And in shamanism, there's the concept of soul retrieval and the idea that when a person undergoes a traumatic experience that they can't integrate, that they can't digest, the bit of their soul breaks off and stays in that place in the time-space continuum until it can be, dealt with. In the meantime, the rest of the you move away from these traumas in time and space, but you don't necessarily resolve them. So they continue, to oscillate in your field with that story. So as I was finding these loud spots, these areas of energy and moving them back into the body, I was like, this is like sonic soul retrieval or, defragmenting a hard drive. Very, interesting thought that we can go back in time along the timeline in the biofield and actually retrieve these aspects that just got stuck there. And what's so cool is that as we discharge these memories, out of the standing waves, we harmonize the waveform, we decouple the electricity, magnetism? No, really. Photons? I mean, I'd say photons as my kind of working hypothesis as exactly what it is I'm moving. And the reason why I say it's light is because as we restore this energy back into people's systems, everybody says the same thing. I feel lighter. I feel lighter. And not only do people feel lighter, I mean, they have less symptoms, they have more potential, they have more of themselves available for themselves. And I've been able to witness so many people who, they'll say, oh, I went home and I cleaned out that closet, or I busted that clutter, or I wrote that book, or I finished that project, or, I quit that job, or whatever it is, because they have more of themselves now available to themselves, not stuck hanging out in their past, in the wrong place. It's been liberated and restored into the kind of general overall potential of their being, right? So people become more themselves. They become activated. They become empowered. They become unstuck. And, it's not as simple as change your thinking, change your life. Like, we've got these real impediments, these real stuck areas, and they can even be informed by our ancestors. I work with what I call energenetics. It's not epigenetics, but energenetics, which is the tone of the song of our DNA. It's the emotional experiences of our ancestors and how that has been encoded in the DNA that has been passed along. I often find people who have the vibrational signature of depression in their field from conception. And so here they are, not realizing that their depression has roots maybe 2 or 3 generations back. And they're trying to solve the problem of their own depression at the level of me and mine, when really the roots are deeper than they realize. And it's not as simple as change your thinking, change your life, because you're tonally encoded with that, predisposition towards depression or towards anxiety. You came in with it, and it's not your fault. But the sound can shift it. That's the amazing thing, is that simply introducing a coherent frequency into these areas of incoherent expression will cause the body to spontaneously auto-tune itself back to what I call factory settings. The body knows exactly, it's got the ability to scan files, go back to like, where can I find the information of a pure expression here? And it will use that really simple, steady, coherent input to find that, and to start expressing it. And it's immediate and dramatic in many cases.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the interaction between the sound frequencies of the forks and photons and biophotons, and there's some kind of a communication between these two different types of energy. And interconnected, yet at the same time, there's a distinction between the fields in which they exist. I use a tool called the BioWell, which measures, that you may be familiar with, measures biophoton emissions from the fingertips, and personally have seen dramatic shifts in my overall energy state increasing after a biofield tuning, as well as the chakras shifting to alignment and redistributing energy, that if there's an excessive load in, say, the throat, redistributing it's amazing. And it seems it's almost with 100% in my clinic, 100% accuracy. There is a change in the positive direction. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you speak at all to this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I adore quantification. It thrills me. And I've worked with a number of different devices to measure before and after with biofield tuning. So we've certainly used the BioWell a number of times. And it's really interesting to me to see the renderings of the BioWell and like the chakras being off in different places, and how that really is in alignment with my experience of, like, if somebody, has a lot of sadness, then their heart center is going to be all small and shifted off to the left, that kind of thing. And how when you do an adjustment on somebody, that the BioWell really reflects that. You really see it. I've worked with biophoton counters, with medical thermal imaging, with a thing called a Biofield viewer, with aura cameras, and other things besides that I can't think of in this moment. But basically, heart rate variability monitors. I just hung out with Dr. Jerry Tennant, who wrote the book called Healing is Voltage. And he has a thing that actually tests the voltage of different centers. And so, we saw outcomes with that. My fantasy is to have a lab where we can acquire all of these devices and we can just quantify biofield tuning all day, every day, and come up with all kinds of biomarkers and numbers, because really profound shifts are happening in the body. They're happening really fast. So it's really great to do before and after stuff.
Do you have a favorite tool or a tool that you have found that matches up most accurately with your personal observation of someone's biofield?
Not yet. There's apparent. I'm really interested in seeing what's going on in the brain when we're working on the field, and I know that there's some new brain scanning technology out there that is a lot less invasive and more elegant than an fMRI. So I'd love to get my hands on that or hang out with some people who have one, because I'm very, very curious about the correlation between these charged memories or experiences or parts of the field and how they, connect to what's going on in the brain. Yeah.
Talking about these memories that are sort of stuck or agitated in the field that you work on, it seems to be emotional in nature. Is that, do you think, the primary type of energy? It's emotional energy from a particular event?
I see different things. So, it is mostly emotional. I say that the biggest thing I treat is emotional constipation, because in this culture, we're really not given permission or shown how to express emotions in an appropriate way. And most people default to stuffing. And there's a million ways to suppress your emotions in this culture. So, most of what I find, like people's illnesses and ailments, and, it's all emotional. And once we resolve the underlying unexpressed emotion, then whatever symptom is associated with that tends to go away. So emotions are a big part of it. But you can also come across the mental body. People, what I found is that if you run the mental body really hard and fast, then you override the emotional body. So what a lot of people do is they overthink, right? We see so many people who are like, I can't stop my thinking mind. They don't realize that that is a coping strategy to avoid feeling, because, mom said nice girls don't get angry. Dad said, big boys don't cry. And so, you can't go there. So you've got to come up with some other strategy. So whether it's alcohol or whether it's drugs or whether it's shopping or whether it's overthinking or staying too busy, those are all going to show up as imbalances in the bioplasmic field.
Let's talk a little bit about the forks that you use and the frequencies that you use, because you've experimented with a lot over your history. And I'm very curious as to why these particular frequencies, and if you could talk a little bit about which ones you're using.
Sure. So, when I first got started with the forks, my very first set was the C major scale. And it came with a really simple little instruction book. It said you use C over the root chakra, D over the second, E over the third. So it correlated the 7 major energy centers with the 7 notes in the major scale. And so I used that set for 15 years. But at one point, maybe in 2005 or 2006, I got it in my head that I wanted a different set. And so I went online and I started looking at them. Well, there's so many sets of tuning forks out there. It like boggles the mind. You're like, how do I even know what to pick? Right. So I was like, I can't figure this out. So I asked the universe to figure it out for me and let me know. And so over the next 3 weeks, I encountered, this is really funny and it's true. Like a few days later, one of my friends, an acquaintance sent me an email and he said, I just met a woman who uses solfeggio tuning forks. Have you ever heard of them? And I was like, no, but thanks for letting me know. And then the next week, a friend of mine sent me a YouTube video and she said, hey, I came across these solfeggio frequencies. Have you ever heard of them? And I was like, yes, as a matter of fact, I have just last week. And then on the third week, I met a girlfriend for lunch. And she pulled out a book out of her bag called The Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse. And she said, as I was walking out the door, this book practically fell off the shelf on me. I think you're supposed to read it. And so I did. And it was all about this these solfeggio frequencies and like how they came into being and what they were all about. And they're based all in the number 3. You know, Tesla says if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of 3, 6, and 9. And the solfeggios are all based in 3. Okay, so this was the 3rd time in 3 weeks that this solfeggio set of tuning forks had come to me, and I was like, okay, I got it. That's what I need. So I ordered them and started using them, and they were so beautiful. You know, the C major scale actually sounded kind of dumb and muddy and dull and annoying next to these beautiful crystalline, just sort of amazing tones. So I ended up putting away the C scale and just using the solfeggio set. And I did that for a number of years. But then what happened in 2012 was I started to break them. And the way that I was breaking them was that the tuning fork would suddenly develop a buzzing quality to it, as if like it was like a guitar and a string was broken, like something was buzzing somewhere. And so the first one that happened to, I sent it back, and they were like, well, it's still making 174 hertz. I was like, yeah, it doesn't sound right. So they sent me another one. And that fork lasted about 4 months, and then it started buzzing again. So I kind of got into this routine of having to replace that particular fork, 174 hertz, which is the lowest frequency in the 9-piece solfeggio set. And the one that I ended up using the most, because I found that it was really the most useful frequency for field combing. But then what started happening, and this was all very strange, was that starting in December of 2012, my next fork only lasted me 2 months. And then the next one, 1 month, and then 2 weeks, and then 1 week, and then 3 days, and then 5 hours. Like I was just destroying these forks every time I used them. And then I started destroying other ones in the set too. And so in any session I'm doing, I'm like down a few forks. I'm waiting for them to be replaced. I'm kind of in denial that this is even happening. But what I discovered was that I didn't need all the forks that I was using. Like that, you know, I was getting the same outcomes just using a few different frequencies. And I still don't fully understand like why I was breaking the forks like crazy. But what was going on at the time was I had signed the contract to write my book with Inner Traditions. And I had a deadline of May 1st. And I was trying to be a mom, see clients, teach classes, and write a book all at the same time. I thought I could do it all. And clearly, like some part of me knew that I couldn't do it all. And the only way to make me stop, because I can be a real knucklehead. Like I'm very a determined individual. And somehow some part of me knew that the only way I was going to write my book was if I stopped seeing clients. And the only way I was going to stop seeing clients is if I could actually not even use the forks. And so I ended up having to like put the forks down. I had no choice because every time I picked one up, I destroyed it. And it ended up being like, I actually, there was no way I could have done it all. And I actually needed several months without seeing clients in order to just focus and write the book, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day it turned into to really get all that done. But what it led to was, 1, the realization I didn't need all the forks, and 2, the creation of the forks that I use now, because I actually have manufactured and sell my own line of tuning forks. And the manufacturer of the forks that I was breaking, this company called MetaVibe, he decided to help figure it out and created a whole bunch of different forks of different alloys and different gauges and sent them all to me. And the last man standing, the one that lasted the longest, is the alloy that I now use. So my forks are way better than anything that's out there on the market. I mean, they're a really, really high quality tool. They ring loud and clear and bright and long and strong. And, they hold up to this practice of combing through the field, because when you are, hunting distortion and the fork is resonating with that heavy distortion, it's sort of stretching it, it's creating this metal fatigue. So Biofield tuning does in ordinary forks, especially if people are getting things from like China or India, that very poor quality tools that make terrible sounds, quite frankly. If anybody is really thinking that they want to use tuning forks for themselves or into a practice, like get good tools, because there's a lot of junk out there. So now because my forks cost twice as much as ordinary forks, I didn't want to burden people with an entire set, especially if an entire set wasn't necessary. So I just picked a few forks, the 174, which is sort of the primary field combing one that we use. And then I added the 528 hertz frequency, which can sound just very clear and beautiful and like almost like angels are in the room kind of sound. So we use those two unweighted forks. And then I use two weighted forks that are also my own creation. And weighted forks have these little barrels on the ends, and they're designed to be used placing the handles on the body. So running sound into the body, whether it's in meridians or acupuncture points or just muscles or whatever, those are based on the Schumann resonance. So I use 62.64, which is 7.83 times 8. And I use 54.81, which is 7.83 times 7. So they have a difference of 7.83 hertz. So they create a binaural beat of 7.83 hertz if you listen to one in each ear. And I think also they create that binaural beat when you use them together in the body as well. So, the Schumann resonance is the electric pulse of the ionic cavity. It's an approximate or sort of the mean of that. And so if that is the sort of fundamental background electromagnetic pulse that's going on, that's also our brain waves and sort of the alpha theta cusp, sort of a present meditative mindset. I thought that it would be beneficial to the electrical system of the body. And I really found that it is. They're really great frequencies that the body really seems to draw in. So that's what we use. We use the two forks in the field and then the two weighted forks on the body.
You also use quartz crystal, right, for a purpose with the weighted fork. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I had a client come to a session, and again, this was a long time ago, maybe 2006, 2007, 2006. And she brought this crystal with her. It was a Lemurian, Lemurian, as in Lemuria, a Lemurian quartz crystal that sort of differentiated from ordinary quartz by these, what they call laser etched striations on the facets. And she asked if we could use it in her session. And I was really skeptical. I was like, whatever, crystals. But I did because she asked. I didn't really know what to do with it. So I just kind of put it on her body while I was combing. And then we comb, and then we do what's called columning, where we comb in from the side. Like if somebody's lying on a treatment table, you start at the plane of the body and comb in. But then when we're done with that, we column up towards the ceiling, which is creating what we call like a laser-like coherent pathway of information flow between the body and the unified field, so that we are connected to the now and responding from the now instead of reacting from all of these old things in our pain body or our field. And so, ask me the question again.
I forgot too. Where were we? Yeah, so, about crystal, about how you're using them, the significance of it.
So I put it on her body and noticed immediately that it added more efficiency to that process. The tone came in clearer, faster, brighter. It focused more quickly. I was like, whoa, that really did something. And, I owned a really busy restaurant for 13 years, like off the hook, lines out the door restaurant. So I'm kind of a fanatic about efficiency. And so anything that adds efficiency to an equation is, exciting to me. So I was really intrigued, and I was like, hey, can I borrow this? Can I use it for this week? And so I started using it in all my sessions. And I really observed that it made a difference. So she finally wanted it back, and I kind of reluctantly gave it to her. And then I did a session without it, and I was like, oh, damn, I need one of those. So I went off crystal shopping, came home, my very own Lemurian, and used it like that for a while, just putting it on the body. But then one day I was working on a woman who was lying face down on my table, and she was wearing a spaghetti strap tank top. And I could see that her muscles, like all in her upper back, they were flat and hard and rigid, and she was complaining about all this tension. And so as I suddenly got the idea to take the crystal and place the pointy end on her body and take the tuning fork and put it on the faceted end of the crystal. And so I did that, and I ran the sound through the crystal into her body. And immediately observed like her muscles went from being flat and hard and rigid to like plumping up like a baby's bottom, just like whoop. Suddenly they were just like soft. And I was like, oh my God, that's really wild. I went over the other side of her spine and I did the same thing happened. And she was like, what did you do? She stood up and she kind of rotated her shoulders back. And she's like, oh my God, what did you do? And I was like, I don't know. And it was really cool. But then I'm like, what just happened? Like, what was that all about? Right. So I go off in flurry and try to do some research and understand what's the nature of a crystal, what is happening when you do that. And what I discovered is that the nature of quartz is that when you run a current through it, it transforms that current into an amplified pulse. It translates it, but that is the nature of a quartz crystal. That's why they're used in clocks, for example, because you put a little electric current through it, it comes out the other end in this rhythmic, predictable pulse. It makes it a timekeeper. So that was what had happened. The sound current had been transformed into this amplified pulse going into her body. I then learned that the work of John Beaulieu and some other scientists showed that tuning forks cause the body to create nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is a gas that puffs out of our cells. It tells our blood vessels to dilate and our muscles to relax. So I hypothesized that I had hyperstimulated the production of nitric oxide in her body in that region by introducing this pulsed sound into her body, and that had led to this spontaneous, dilation of the blood vessels and relaxation of the muscles. So that has since become kind of staple practice in this work is to run sound through the crystal, and whether it's into trigger points or into joints that have compression. There's just something about these sound waves coming into the body, these pulse sound waves, that really creates a change in the biology and physiology. It's pretty dramatic.
It's amazing. We're getting close on time here. Got a couple questions. I'll try to be succinct with them. Can you speak to synergistic healing modalities that go well, that are paired well with biofield tuning?
Yeah, that's a really great question. What I find is that biofield tuning helps most things to work better. Like it can be a standalone. It can certainly do some amazing things by itself. But I know for myself, whenever any part of me starts to go south, that I go for the multimodal approach. I'm going to go get massage. I'm going to get chiropractic, acupuncture, body work, and biofield tuning. And I'm going to correct whatever is starting to drift out of balance with many different angles of approach quickly. And then it resolves, right? So, and I'm at liberty to do that because everybody wants a biofield tuning session. So I can trade with anyone and get it right away for these kinds of things, which is really, I'm very fortunate that way. But I think that it goes great with any kind of body work. And especially if you receive a number of biofield tuning sessions, that you should go get myofascial release or cranial sacral massage. Just straight up massage is wonderful. And I get regular massage. Chiropractic, why are your bones going out in the first place? Well, magnetic fields guide electric currents. So bones are piezoelectric, they run electric currents, but those electric currents are guided by the information in the magnetic field. And so if you have a big, heavy perturbation out in your field that's trapped a lot of magnetic energy, that blueprint is going to keep on pulling that spinal subluxation. Every time you're under stress, boom, your neck's going to go out. And the reason your neck's going out is because of the magnetic field. So if we adjust the magnetic field, at the same time we adjust the body, then the likelihood of that going out becomes greatly reduced. Chiropractors don't like to hear that. I thought they'd be excited. I really don't like hearing that. Let's see, what else do I like? Acupuncture works great. Homeopathy, no. I think that homeopaths, they don't want other people messing with vibrational information while they're trying to figure out what your constitutional or whatever is. So we try to say, if you're under the care of a homeopath, you probably don't want to do biofield tuning unless you get the green light from them. Can you think of any others?
I've been playing with certain frequencies of light, and have seen some pretty interesting results, mostly with the infrared spectrum of light and upregulation of mitochondrial function, helping with that redistribution process as the as they're able to function better, they're able to move energy that you're using with the fork and put it into the right place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So excellent. That's fascinating. There's a bit in your book about the non-local field and how it relates to your ability to biofield tune at a distance.
Yeah.
Can you briefly speak about that, if it's possible?
Briefly, well, people asked me for years if it was possible to do this at a distance, right? And just like I was super skeptical of crystal, I'm really even skeptical of tuning. I'm like, I'm really skeptical about most things. I didn't believe it was possible. I say people, I'm using tuning forks on the body. Like, this is physics. Like, of course I don't do it at a distance. Like, how silly of you to even ask me that question. But then one day, one of my mentors, a fellow by the name of Dr. Carl Merritt, who wrote the foreword to my book, he persuaded me to try a distance session on him in California. And so I was like, okay, Carl, since you asked, I'll give it a try, but I really not thinking it's going to work. So what I did was I imagined that he was on my treatment table in Vermont while he was lying down in his clinic in California. And we weren't on the phone. And I started to approach the table as if he was really there. And much to my surprise, like all the same patterns that would show up if someone was really there showed up. And I went through and I took notes of like all the different ages and years and areas and organs and things that were out of whack. And I did the adjustments on them. And then I called him and I shared my notes with him. And he said, that is all exactly correct. And I experienced a state change while you were working on me. Like, I could feel it. And I was totally blown away. I was like, oh my God, I really can do it at a distance. So I started working on people at a distance and getting the same kind of outcomes that I was getting in person. But then my book came out and my practice got so busy and I just had to shut my practice down because it became completely overwhelming. But what I started doing was experimenting with doing these group distance sessions, which is what I do now. And people enroll, like I've got one coming up in May called Quieting the Thinking Mind. And so you dial in and you listen to me conduct a group tuning. And I do the same thing. Like if we were doing one-on-one, I'm like, this is what I'm encountering. This is what I'm moving. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm shifting. And people have these experiences. Even listening to the recordings of these things, people experience significant state changes, which really blows my mind. Okay, well, how is that working? So that brings us back to the ether, the idea that the ether records everything. And it's holographic, so that, you exist holographically within the ether, and you are technically infinite. So you exist everywhere in the ether. So I can pluck the file that is you out of the ether, put you on my table, and we can edit you in real time like a Google Doc through the ether, which is really wild. And so because the ether is beyond time and space, that's why these recordings work. Because when I do a group, I work on everyone who's present and everyone who will ever listen to the recording, so that you are actually there on that recording that was recorded last year, so that when you go and listen to it, that information is impacting you.
Let's give us, if you can, the ways people can reach out, get in touch, learn more about you, find your book, find your forks, these group distance sessions.
Sure. Well, everything is on my website, which is biofieldtuning.com. So that's all one word, biofieldtuning.com. And we sell the tuning forks, instructional DVDs, posters of the Biofield anatomy map, which is really fascinating for people to look at and see what their ailments correspond with that part. Oh, my left shoulder hurts. That's it. Sadness, right? That kind of thing. We teach classes. We teach certification classes. So those are on there. I have practitioners all over the country and in 5 different countries right now. So, if you want to receive a session, you can't get one from me unless you do a group, but you can get one from our many practitioners. So, and the book is on Amazon and it's like $12. So yeah, got a lot of great information in it.